of you, like me, are interested in what's going on in Columbus and in the arts, and y'all have been longtime supporters of Do Good. So, a quick update. Um, the team and I uh, all had a wonderful opportunity over 2 weekends to go to Savannah to see a show that's up there at an organization called Arts Southeast. They've got 39 Do Good images in a show that will be up through this weekend. And Arts Southeast is an incredibly impressive group. And they have tons of energy. They do great shows. Very Columbus-centric, good friends of us. They showed Coulter Fussel's work previously before our show. Most of you may know Coulter's parents, Fred and Kathy, that are here tonight. I'm so glad they chose to come to the Do Good show instead of go to their daughter's opening in New York City tonight. We won't let Coulter know. but they're also doing a Passaquan show later in the year. So we really love the focus on West Georgia and East Alabama. But if you're ever in Savannah, please look up Arts Southeast. They've got a building in an up-and-coming part of Savannah that I wasn't familiar with called Starland. Great restaurants, a lot of energy, and it's a lot of fun. But in addition to hosting exhibits, they have low-cost artist studios. And we've talked in Columbus a lot. I mean, there's so many great SCAD graduates that hang around Savannah. Savannah is a very expensive place to live, and Art Southeast is one of the sort of carrots that keeps people there with these low-cost studios. And for those of us that are interested in the arts in Columbus, what can we do to help make it affordable in the way of studios to keep Hannah and Ryland's students here in Columbus after they graduate? Another thing that they do that's really amazing, this is a very bottoms-up neighborhood group, but they publish, I think, a New York quality magazine called Impact. And we're honored. Coulter, I think, was featured in an earlier issue. We're very honored to be featured in this issue. But it is a very beautiful magazine. And it's not just about what's going on in their space or in Savannah. They have listings about art events throughout the Southeast. So it's really a wonderful organization over there, Arts Southeast. So we have a new show that just opened this weekend at University of Alabama, has a downtown gallery in Tuscaloosa, and they've got 30-something of our images over there. So if your travels should take you to Tuscaloosa this summer, please stop by there. One of the photographers in the collection, Titus Higgins, who is from Durham, is the subject of a beautiful new documentary film that's streaming right now on PBS. So any of you that have access to PBS's Passport, the film is called Always Looking, Titus Brooks Higgins. And it's really a beautiful, beautiful film, and I would encourage you to look at it. Many of you have met previously a young photographer, Emily Williams, whose work, the story of Jewish life in the rural South, we exhibited her work earlier. We've got some upstairs still. Emily is back with us after receiving her MFA from LSU, working this summer before she begins her pursuit of a PhD in American Studies at Chapel Hill. And she is serving as our inaugural curatorial fellow. And so, Emily, tell us a little bit about what you've been doing this summer and what you're working on.
Can you hear me? Is it okay? I'm working on putting together a turnkey show out of our collection. So that's something that could go out to institutions across the region or further out if people want it. It's called Southern Belle Redux. So kind of asking questions about notions of Southern womanhood, who gets access to it, and the myths behind it. So.
We did a strategic planning session a few years ago, and while many of the organizations we work with, like Art Southeast, have curatorial staff and have programming dollars, we realize that a lot of the host organizations that are targets for the Do Good Fund collection don't have those things. And so the idea is that if we could put together a turnkey exhibition, a box that you open and has everything, framed images, wall tags, posters to put out front, marketing materials, that we could help some of the smaller organizations, non-traditional organizations, share this great work in their communities. Two CSU updates. Great friends of ours, Rylan and Hannah here, as they almost always are, just announced, as y'all may have seen in the newspaper today, a new chair of the art department. I heard and it's great. We've had some wonderful interim chairs of the department, but it's important. The art department is important to Columbus State. It's important to Columbus. We see what the Swope School of Music has done for the school and for this community. And there was a lot of energy at the art department. We're really growing the student enrollment. It stagnated a little bit, and I think having new leadership will really help. I learned a really interesting fact at the recent CSU Foundation board meeting. The department at CSU that has the highest student retention rate of every other department in the university is the art department. And they're so focused on student retention, as every university is. And it's so great that we've got a new leader of a department that's already the leader in student retention. And this will help enhance the student experience and help the faculty experience and the faculty retention experience. And we're very excited to welcome Jonathan Klein to CSU just in a month or so. So that's wonderful. Also, our friends at the Bo Bartlett Center are doing a beautiful Butch Anthony show. Some of y'all may have seen some of their social media. It is just incredible. We had a Butch Anthony show here that sort of traced the history of his work, but these new bone sculptures, I guess he calls them, just absolutely beautiful. So make sure that in the next few weeks you get a chance to get by the Bartlett Center and see that great work. Now, back to why we're here, tonight's program. We are honored that Beth Lilly would come down from Atlanta to visit with us. I told her I had looked back on my emails, and I think we have been online dating for about 8 years now. I got to know Beth when she was executive director of the Atlanta Photography Group. And I was really, really impressed with her passion for photography. But I think even more so of how committed she was to support and help photographers get their work out there, create shows at the gallery that APG ran to bring in a broad spectrum of the community. And sometimes you go to events and you sort of see the same people. I didn't feel that way at APG. I felt it was always the photographers that were represented was a very broad and diverse group of photographers, and I felt the audience reflected that. And you may or may not remember, but you get an assist for one of my favorite acquisitions in our collection. I didn't realize this, but Beth asked me to be a juror for one of their shows, and one of the photographers that we juried in came up to me that evening at the opening and said, do you know, and I'm from Kentucky, and he goes, I don't know if you've ever heard of a guy named Meatyard, but after he died, the family hired me to print Ralph Eugene Meatyard's work. And for those of you who know, one of the just really most famous, I'd say Southern photographers, but a Kentucky-based photographer. Very interesting work. So this guy said, I printed all of this work. In exchange for that, they gave me a portfolio, and I'd like to donate a piece to the Do Good Fund collection. And so he sent down 8 or 10 images, and I recall that Rylan and I looked through the digital files and thought about it, and that was all because you asked me to come up and jury the show. So thank you very much for that. Beth has been a photographer for a while. She has exhibited in group shows and individual shows, not only in the Southeast, but really nationally. This is a beautiful show of her work that she's going to talk about tonight. It's been exhibited in Athens, at the Spalding Nix Gallery in Atlanta, which I think is one of the galleries or the gallery that represents your work. It's been part of this, I believe, is exhibited at Slow Exposure. Our friends up in Pike County that do a wonderful photo show every September. And I think also at the Southeastern Center for Photography in Greenville. Her work is held in a number of prominent museums, including the High, the Ogden, the New Mexico Museum of Art, and lots of private collections. She's been in this business a long time, but she has never lost her enthusiasm, but more importantly, she's never lost her desire to help others and lift others up to enjoy the opportunity to show work and expand audiences. Thank you for coming to Columbus. And Beth, the floor is yours.
How does that sound? Does it work? Okay, good. I'm going to be seated here so I can operate the slideshow thing. But thank you, Alan, for a wonderful introduction. And you know, it's so funny. I could say the same thing about Alan and the Do-Good Fund. It's like when I heard the mission, I was like, oh my God, that's amazing. And I think the work that this organization does is just priceless, because people need to be in very important collections. They need to be shown the community benefits from their mission, the artist benefit. It's just a wonderful way of people pulling together to create opportunities for some artists who really deserve it. So thank you for the work that you're doing at the Do Good.
I'm so close to you.
Well,
like,
that's great.
hello.
I'm going to look at you the whole time and talk right. Oh, where did I put my talk? Oh, here it is. Okay, good. So my talk. I find it really hard to begin a talk. I mean, where do you start? Because any project that you make has been the process of every other series that I've made, everything I've seen, all these ideas that I've come across. So your mind just starts going in circles. But I was looking at the promotions that Do Good did for this project, and I so love that the tagline is a meditation on a modern journey. And if I were you, and I'm very snarky, I'd be asking, well, what makes a journey specifically modern versus what, ancient, old-fashioned, you know? So I thought I'd start there and try and answer that question. And there's one other question that I will try to answer, which is one I ask myself. Why, oh why, do I photograph interstates? So, we're going to go back a little bit. Bear with me. When I think about great travel narratives of history and mythology, my thoughts immediately turn to Joseph Campbell and his famous concept of the hero's journey. For those who are not familiar, I found this lovely illustration on the internet. Campbell describes a narrative arc that is common to pretty much every single culture throughout time, where the protagonist, he starts on a journey, leaving the known, traveling out into the unknown to be challenged by new places, new cultures, and new ways of thinking. The hero then returns home transformed. That's the classic idea of a journey. There's another kind of journey or travel that is just as ancient as the kind told in these kinds of myths. And I'm talking about our thousands of years as human beings spent as nomads, constantly on the move, whether hunting, gathering, herding. And I've long felt that human beings have a deep-seated need for forward momentum. And we still use the act of walking to clear our heads, calm our nerves, or comfort a crying baby. We are inherently restless. Now, on the personal side, I was always a very restless person. Um, I grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina, and my friends and I walked for miles every day. We walked to school, we walked to the store, we walked to our friends' neighborhoods. And for myself, it was as much about what could be seen along the way as well as the destination. And anytime I was in a car, a bus, or a boat, I was absorbed with watching the world outside. So it was really devastating when our family moved to a remote country road outside a small town outside of Atlanta. We had no neighbors and there was nothing within walking distance. And I really wanted to be active in all the school organizations and do things with my friends, but there was no one to drive me. I was stuck at home for years, bored and lonely and miserable as only a preteen can be. And when I finally did get my license, I mean, it was literally life changing. I cannot tell you how much I loved my car and how much I loved driving. And it just opened up the whole world for me. And as well as the positive, so I started to turn to driving when I was angry or frustrated. I would get in the car and I'd go to 285, which encircles the city, and I would just drive in a circle till I finally calmed down and I would go back home. This habit of retreating to the interstate for undisturbed time to work through issues continued on into my adulthood. Entering the interstate felt like I was stepping outside of the world with its duties and responsibilities. Having uninterrupted peace and solitude for long periods of time to let things stew on the back burner makes it easy for me to gain perspective and objectivity on complex situations. So in 2014, I'd recently left my corporate job and I was going through a divorce and I was trying to make things work out financially. And this was a huge change in my life and it was getting a little dicey. The project I was working on at the time, it's every single one of these stories is true. I needed lots of young children as models. I don't have any myself. And my only friends with kids lived in New Orleans or Mobile or Florida, which was great because that became my excuse to go on these long drives so I could work through major issues in my life. So there I was, driving on the interstate with a carload of camera equipment. What's a girl to do? Um, my working method as an artist, I don't start with an idea or concept and then go out and shoot it. Instead, I'll try a whole bunch of different ideas and somehow in this sort of stumbling about and being intuitive about what to shoot and how, a single image will come out of this that will just grab me. It'll capture my heart. And I think of that image as a guidepost. So in 2014, feeling bored on a very long trip, I decided to play with motion and shutter speed by sticking my camera out the window and photographing people. And this is one of the images that I took. And when I saw this image, I became really intrigued. Like I said, I love looking at the world, and I especially love looking at people. I was captivated with this young man's expression, especially in the context of being on the interstate. I was wondering, what is he thinking about? He's clearly focused on somewhere with this kind of intensity, like he's trying to get somewhere. So with this as my inspiration, I decided to make more. So that spring, I started going on road trips specifically to photograph people on the interstate. There's something very intriguing about observing people when they're just being themselves. I love pose portraits, but we all know spontaneity and unselfconscious behavior disappears instantly when a camera is introduced. When I photograph people, the images I like most are when they've forgotten that I'm photographing them. A project I did as a graduate student was centered on that. appropriately called Girls in Bars. It was about being at an age where you just wanted to hang out with your friends and make new ones. But being a young woman in this kind of situation, there was always kind of this edge to it. But anyways, what I did is I asked my friends if I could photograph them while we were hanging out at a bar. And as I was talking to them, I would just keep my camera up to my eye and just keep it there and talking while we're interacting. And pretty soon they would forget that the camera was there. And that's when I would start photographing because they were just being themselves and spontaneous. Even more candid are people in cars. It's a well-known phenomenon that people behave in cars as if they're in their living room, as if they're not on public display where everyone can see exactly what they're doing. At the beginning phase of this project, I immediately thought of a series by Harry Callahan. Some of you might be familiar with it. It's the one I've always loved called Women Lost in Thought. Here's some images from that one. He shot this on the streets in Chicago. Harry Callahan has always been a special photographer to me. I got my MFA under John McWilliams at Georgia State, and his professor, he got his MFA under Harry Callahan at RISD. So I was always kind of considered Harry Callahan to be like my photographic grandfather. Anyways, so how Callahan shot this in Chicago, and I really related to that urge. It's about when you see, another person who's deep in thought, oblivious to their surroundings, to wonder what's going on in their minds. It is utterly unknowable, but nevertheless endlessly fascinating. So I originally called my interstate project Lost in Thought, an homage to Harry Callahan. And there was one other project that I looked at that I felt was similar, and it was by Philip Lorca de Corsia, and it's called Heads. He placed the camera on scaffolding above a crosswalk in Manhattan, and then there was a motion detector that triggered a high-powered strobe. Both of these feature a close, intimate look of faces, and assumes that we can that something is revealed in their expression of their internal lives. So these were the series I was thinking about as I was creating my work. And as I mentioned, I did some color landscapes too. And I was continuing to do those at the same time. I didn't think of them as the same series, but related. I felt these landscapes were about the subjective nature of time, blah, 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 blah. But that was when I was running APG from 2014 to 2018. And I had to put the whole project on hold. And it wasn't just a time issue, but it was one of those things where I'd hit this plateau. Something wasn't working with a project. It needed to go somewhere, but I had no idea where. So I put it on hold, but I picked out 2 images that I thought of as guideposts. This was one of them, and this is the other one, a portrait and a landscape. I knew that these images were pointing me in the direction I needed to go. I just didn't know what that direction was. So I taped these up to the wall of my studio to just kind of keep that simmering on the back burner. And the interesting thing is this photograph of the tunnel, I didn't make it for this project. It was for a different series entirely. But there was something about it, a gut feeling that said it belonged in this project and that it had something to say. So I'm a big believer in researching other bodies of work. I showed you some that are similar, but one way to discover what your project is truly about is to discover what it is not. And if you don't know, I'll tell you, there's many projects that were shot on the interstate. In fact, it's really overdone. And this is funny. I even came across two other women photographing on the interstate one day when I was photographing. So one of the things I needed to do was to find out what new thing could I bring? What could I offer to this conversation that hasn't already been said? So let's look at a couple of these. One of the most famous is Andrew Bush. These pictures were taken in the 1980s on the interstates around LA. I think of his work as social documentary. You know, it's about the car culture in LA at this particular time and place. Another well-known project was Lee Friedlander's America by Car. He shot this in the early 2000s. And there's a gazillion road trip projects. The most famous, of course, is Robert Frank's The Americans. All three of these fit into that classic journey structure that Campbell talks about of going out into the unknown, where you photograph what you encounter. So back to my project that's on pause. When 2020 and the pandemic hit, and I was trying to figure out how I could photograph people safely, and I started thinking about the Interstate Project. And I was looking at those two prints that I had taped up on the wall, and it was looking at this one when suddenly it just all fell together. It just clicked. First and foremost, this project is not about the interstate. It is, in fact, about the experience of driving on the interstate, which is really quite different. And it's about how a very boring public work project, this practical, mundane system, could have unintended consequences. The interstate has many, but this is about one that I find particularly fascinating and mysterious and unseen. And what I needed to do with this project was convey the experience of driving on the interstate. The viewer needed to feel what I was feeling. So I needed to relate my personal experience and hopefully connect to people who also experienced the space as I did. So now that I had some real direction and some real excitement, I went back onto the road. On these drives, my thoughts now mused on the unique qualities of this space. Why do I feel like I step outside of time and space when I'm on the interstate? So here's a fun little list. Thinking about it, interstates have no actual destination. They go past places or close to places, but they do not go to anywhere. There's no actual beginning or ending. So in a way, when you're on the interstate, you are nowhere. 2, the structures are repetitive and nearly identical. Without landmarks, it's hard to gauge the passage of time or distance. And without the linear unfolding of time, it's like you're in stasis. Number 3, it has no specific geographic location. What I mean is when a friend calls you on the phone and says, "Where are you at?" You don't say, "I'm between Atlanta and Birmingham." You say, "I am on the interstate." And it doesn't matter whether you're in Texas or Maine or Missouri. It's one place. Number 4, the interstate isolates you from the surrounding areas with physical boundaries. So we learn nothing about the area that we traverse. And by design, nothing ever happens on an interstate. It's meant to be as uneventful and unchallenging as possible. So the minimal engagement needed to drive safely is just enough to keep the rational, logical parts of the brain busy, leaving the more creative, intuitive parts of the brain to daydream, to free associate, and to have aha moments. And since it takes roughly 1 minute to travel 1 mile, then time and distance conflate, and they are the same. Each of us are completely enclosed in our own little bubble. The car itself cuts us off from our surroundings, and even though we pass other drivers that are just feet away from us, it's like they're not even there. And if we turn off our phones, our music, our podcasts, then we become completely disconnected from the outside world, free from duties, responsibilities, distractions. So to enter the interstate is to literally enter a kind of limbo or parallel universe, a liminal space in a no man's land. So to convey my concept about this unique aspect of interstates, I saw that the landscapes were key, and in exhibition they needed to be encountered immediately to set the scene and telegraph to the viewer that this is not a literal description of a familiar place, and kind of establish this emotional tone of the unreal. Many people describe experiences like standing on the rim of the Grand Canyon or looking at the vastness of the nighttime sky when you're out in the middle of an ocean, and how it makes them feel very, very small. And there's this wonderful sense of awe and connection with the vastness of the universe, and feeling the loss of self being swallowed up in that vastness. And I really wanted the viewer to have something like that experience. So creating the sense of monumentality was important, was behind the decision to print the landscapes as large as possible. So I also emphasize the monumentality of the interstate structures themselves and the way many of the shots are composed. The landscapes reveal a place that is insubstantial, indistinct. It's not quite solid, like this truck. It's apt to disappear. And when you can see beyond the highway itself, the scenes are empty and generic, and just have this feeling of this infinity of nothingness. Some images speak to how the physical structure isolates people from the rest of the world. And I converted one of my cameras to infrared. Initially, it was to separate the greens. You live here in the South, you know, in the summer, it's green and green and green. And photographically in black and white, that's medium gray, and it's just a big boring mush. So I had it, it's like you can tune it to a bandwidth of the infrared, and I wanted it very subtle to separate out those tones. But I think it also gives it this kind of edgy quality to it when it's kept on the subtle side. You might notice that subjects that are closer to the lens show more blur than things that are far away. While this references that kind of wacky nature of time on the interstate, it's also a wonderful metaphor. You know, when you're in the midst of a chaotic situation, it's really hard to make sense of things. But when you gain some distance, you also gain clarity about a situation. So it makes for a nice metaphor. And separated from the need to illustrate an actual place, the interstate structures are free to become these kinds of metaphors that we use to describe a journey of personal growth, bridges, distant horizons, you know, passages, the light at the end of the tunnel. And then finally, I wanted some images that express this kind of existential angst, not to be a downer, but, you know, eventually we will die and you will be alone when you die. And that's kind of the feeling I get when I'm alone on the interstate at night, that kind of sobering thought about that eventual reality. So how did my realization change how I was shooting people? So let's go back to Andrew Bush's project. All of these are long shots, so you get to see a good bit of the car. All of the people are in profile. All the compositions are nearly identical. So it becomes like a typology. And when you set up everything being same, it almost forces viewers to look at the small differences. But I also feel it kind of others people. It objectifies them which is not what my project was about at all. So now let's look at my guidepost portrait. This simple act of changing the angle of the camera to be head on and then coming in really close now turns the attention to the people as individuals. And the emphasis is on their expression, which, as I mentioned before, we see as being an expression of their inner life. So I now changed how I shoot to use longer lenses to zoom, and I repositioned my cameras in the car to be pointing backwards. Other things that I did, I use a short depth of field to isolate the subject, and it keeps the viewer's attention on the people. A lot of work. I had to remove all the text and symbols because it's very distracting and it starts going into status, and I just wanted to bypass all of that entirely. You might notice that the contrast of the interiors is a lot punchier, and I use the car structures to keep the viewer's eye inside the car. I emphasize the reflections on the car surfaces and windows at times to kind of give that idea of people being in their own little personal bubble. And when I was selecting for images, I was looking for distinctive features in the interiors or clothing that could add another layer of meaning. Like here, that really unusual visor reminded me of blinders, which kind of signals this refusal to look beyond this kind of tunnel vision. And I had a rule not to use images where people were looking at the camera, i.e. engaging the viewer. This was an exception. A, his hand is blocking his face, but two, to me expresses a refusal not to look out, but a refusal to allow others in, insistence on staying isolated. I was also looking for images with backgrounds that were similar to the landscapes to try to tie them together in feeling. This was something that I was battling against. It's very easy to feel like the portraits and landscapes were different series, and I needed to try and make them feel cohesive. And you need variety, but when your subject is people being lost in thought, that often means expressionless. So one of the reasons it took me so long to finish this project was trying to find happy people. They were few and far between. So one thing that always comes up is people are wondering how I took these pictures. I'll say I prefer to work alone, so I shot 90% of this while I was driving on the interstate. If I did have a driver, it was to shoot landscapes so I could actually compose. But typically, I would have one camera, the landscape camera, the infrared, on my lap so I could just grab it and shoot out the window. I always kept my eye on the road. For the portraits, I started out with having a camera up front with me and pointed to one side or the other, but as I said, I had to change all that. So then I went to 2 or 3 cameras that were in the back seat, and you'll see the broken monopod. What to do with my broken monopod? So I had it there so that I could have the remote cord draped over. There's one right there, and I had another one that was always tucked in my bra strap, so it was right there. And so that was kind of the setup, and I would at times kind of adjust those. They weren't always straight back, a little angled and everything. So who I photographed then was completely random. I would keep my eyes on the road, and I was aware, through the rearview mirrors when a car was about to pass me, or I was about to pass a car, and then I would just had it on continuous. And so I couldn't control who I shoot. I just shot everybody. And there was limited controls, so I had a really high rate of failure. Uh, but I love working with challenging cameras or situations. And really, the success of this project was from persistence and patience and selecting just the right images from the thousands that I shot. Typically, I would take a road trip of about 3 to 5 days. I mapped out a route um, in different areas in the southeast. All of these were shot in the southeast. And the route varied according to where the sun would be, and the car would be related to that. I would begin shooting at dawn and I would drive to sunset and I would stop only for gas, coffee, and the restroom. Every once in a while, I'd get to the hotel early, have dinner, and then go shoot some landscapes at dusk and night. So one of these trips, I would wind up with about 1,000 to 6,000 images. And I would also do on day trips as the weather and my schedule allowed, which was just kind of a mix of the interstates around Atlanta. I did have a shot list for items that I wanted for the landscapes. I wanted a good bridge. I wanted a billboard and power lines. I already had a tunnel, but I loved the light from people who were driving through tunnels. Unfortunately, there are not a lot of tunnels in the South. There's one that goes under Mobile, but it's very dark, and you spend like a half hour in the tunnel, and the only time there's enough light is like 2 seconds, right? You come to the end, and dang it, every time I drove through that tunnel, there would be nobody behind me or beside me, and to turn around and do it again, hours. I spent a whole day doing that. So one issue I'd like to address that from the beginning, um, I was not trying to hide anything. My cameras were there on view. I didn't want to be sneaking around and shooting people. And it really did bother me that there was no way for me to ask people for permission to shoot them. Um, but you know how when you're looking at somebody, they turn and look at you, it's like they know. And that happens with the camera. It was uncanny. Every time I passed people, it's like they knew I was photographing them and they would turn and look. So what I would do is I would go gauge by their expression. They're giving the peace sign or waving or expressionless, it was fine. But if I got a nasty look or an obscene gesture, then no. And so I would not use any photographs of those people. Um, Another thing that I noticed was that people seem to, if there was any expression that was most common, it would be a look of concern. People wondering, what the heck is she doing? What is she with ice? Is this some kind of CI thing? Something like that. So I came up with this sign, how to say as succinctly and quickly as possible what I was doing. So it said art. Okay, so she's doing an art project. And you're my muse. It signaled my intention that people are my inspiration, and I wasn't looking to make fun of people or anything like that. So I want to close out and go back to that original question about the modern journey. And I feel that in America, the reality of the modern journey for most of us has become a complete opposite in the past, and that instead of going out into the world to encounter new experiences, the most common mode of travel today is car and plane. And both of those entail withdrawing from interaction with the external world. Travelers seem to be opting for complete control of their immediate environment, choosing comfort and privacy over interaction and challenges. We want our independence to choose where, when, and how. But when we get there in isolation in our car, we usually self-soothe with the distractions that in the end disconnect us from ourselves. I believe that in contemporary America, there's a paucity of opportunities for self-reflection for developing our inner lives. So in contemporary culture, I think the hero's journey needed to evolve to be internally focused. We're overstimulated, horribly stressed, and disconnected from the important part of the journey, which is to be truly aware of the life going on inside yourself. And as an artist, I'm saying, here, here's a place with the opportunity where we can just slip out of the insanity, connect to ourselves and to our personal journey of a human being. Thank you.
As a lawyer, I'm very glad that you tell us how you took the photograph. And everybody else got up to say it. As a frequent traveler to Atlanta, I'll have to say you're the first person I've ever met who gets on 285 to relax. I think that was a different 285.
Yeah, it was also 3 in the morning.
So I want to open up to a few questions, and then we want to break up and go back to the bar and have an opportunity to talk to Beth one-on-one. Before I forget, I want to introduce one other person, Ashley Yates, who is sitting on the front row. We are doing something else to check an important box on our strategic plan in addition to a turnkey exhibition. We have engaged Ashley to help us put together a show, Travel. And she is putting together a show of the first family of photography in Mississippi. Maud Clay, her husband Mike, and their daughter Sophia, who is also a wonderful, I would say, emerging photographer. Maud is William Eggleston's first cousin, is that correct? A wonderful photographer in her own right, and really, really well respected in Mississippi and beyond for her work. And Ashley's been working on this project for a few months now. We're going to open that show here in September, and it'll be here for about 2 months. We'll have a salon in October. Ashley and Claims will be here. And then we're going to travel that show to New Orleans during Photo Nova and have it up in November and December there. So thank you. Ashley's here on a I got to come see the gallery in person so we can do this right. And she and her brand new husband, Mark, drove over from Jackson today to spend a day or so here. Thank you all. We tapped with that. That's it. I said, don't just come for us, come with that. So Beth also has some very beautiful, special handmade books. And she brought a couple tonight. So after the talk, she would love to show any of y'all that want to see it, this beautiful book. But now let's open it up for a few minutes if others have questions or anything they want to share.
So talk about the physical learning of the state and how that allows you to go on kind of inspiration.
Yes.
So how do you balance that in the curation and layout of the show?
So it was really important in the curation because, looking at it and, it's so hard. You come across or make these great images, but don't fit the project. And so it was so helpful to finally figure out what it was about, because that's when I could make my curatorial decisions. Looking at it is like, does this feel otherworldly? Looking at the people, do they look like they're involved with some kind of internal drama? So there was a lot of pictures that were cool or interesting or nice or something, but, I had to check them because they didn't fit in the project. Mainly how it affected choices in the exhibition, my idea was kind of like in a film with the landscapes, it's the opening scene, it sets the tone, you have an idea. I talked about them being immersive. And I wanted the portraits to be like groups of people that you encounter, kind of mimic that. Being on the interstate, you're going down the road and there'll be a collection of cars and you look at the people and then you go along and then there's another group of people. And then within the groups, I was looking for some sort of commonality between them. A lot of times it was not anything that could be expressed, but it was a kind of feeling of what was going on rather than a kind of narrative thing.
I was wondering about that, how you had mentioned earlier that you had a background in filmmaking
Yes,
and
yes.
how much of this kind of resonated that, like how it transitioned to, a still photo. Like what was there any correlation to going back to filmmaking into this process?
How did my filmmaking background affect this one?
Yeah.
Well, I think I always think of my photographic projects as a director. And I had a photography class my very last semester. And to me, it's like the photography gave me the ability to make a lot of different films. If you're making a film, it takes years to develop the script, to get the funding. You could spend 5-7 years on a project and it's a complete failure. But with photography, it was a lot faster. And instead of having to translate my vision, I could have this idea in my head, and it's really more like a feeling. I have this feeling, and going out and finding the images. So photography was kind of like a way to do all that. And express it visually. So I'm always kind of thinking in that way. And I think it also is very obvious. All of my projects look very different. A lot of photographers have a signature style that you can see throughout. But when I start thinking about a project, I start thinking about what kind of camera is going to have the right look. Is it going to be this kind of film? Is it going to be black and white? So for me, the style and the look of it is going to be subservient to the concept of the project. And so I'm going to change and take on whatever, style, mode, or whatever that's going to support, the idea of it. Is that? Yeah. But did anybody ever see that film Koyani Scotzi? Okay. Oh my God, that was the film that changed my life. I had no idea. For people who don't know, what was the director? Reginald, but it doesn't matter. Yeah. So he takes the most stunning, beautiful, like the film opens up and it's obviously shot from a plane, and it's, my God, these desert scenes with Monument Valley, it's over the top, and you see that and power lines, and you're waiting for the film to begin, and it's like, my God, it's been 20 minutes, we're still in these opening shots, and then you go, oh, this is the film. and so that was the moment. I had to be like 19 years old, where I was like, I realized the power of visual and how it could cut through things that conversation and plot and all that kind of thing just couldn't. So even as a filmmaker, it was more about image. And I have such a distinct memory. There's a part in the film, even though there's no plot, there's no dialogue, blah, blah, blah. It's just footage, But there's this point, and it's you're going through a lot of shots in Manhattan, these crowds of people, and all of a sudden this man is kind of shabby looking. He collapses on the sidewalk, and the whole time you're feeling about this isolation and just oh, humanity, what have we done? But instantly, all the people around him stop to help him, and I just remember just sobbing, and I still tear up when I think about it. And I was like, my God, that has affected me more than, any other film. That's what I want to do. I want to learn how to use images to say something important. So is Bardo, yes. Um, I went through a lot of different titles with this, and nothing seemed to fit. Um, and then I was listening to a podcast, and they were talking about the idea of a, a bardo. It's a Tibetan word. It means literally an in-between space. And most often, it is about that space between death and being reborn. So it's kind of like a purgatory or a limbo. Um, so, and I was like, wow, that's exactly what this interstate is. You're in between where you were and where you're going to. And in the Tibetan uh, cosmology, um, you meet up with a lot of personal demons and things. But the most important thing is it has the opportunity for transformation. And this is where um, and they say that they identify 6 bardos, like sleep is one. You're in between being awake. Well, you go to sleep, and it's this whole other different world, again, where transformation of yourself is possible. And I was like, well, heck, I've got a 7th one. It's the interstate. So that's where the title came from. I think it was the best one word description that kind of wrapped it all together. Because to me, that idea of transformation was as important as this kind of surreal in between space.
So let's transition. Yes. Beth, thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
We've got a beautiful book back there. We've got Beth here. Let's enjoy each other's guys.
Okay. I-95,
Yes.
1999,
Yes.
right outside Richmond.